You gave her a $30 million Rolls-Royce, and me a $2 piggy bank? The room went silent. Not the kind of silence people notice right away, but the kind that slowly tightens around your chest, until even breathing feels loud. Marcus Carter didn't answer. He stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, glass of champagne still in his hand, as if the question hadn't just cut through the entire Easter celebration like a blade. Around them, cameras were still flashing, guests were whispering, and just outside, parked like a symbol of excess and betrayal, sat the gleaming Rolls-Royce, the one he had just gifted to another woman. Not his wife. Evelyn Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't even move. She just looked at him. And somehow, that was worse. Have you ever been in a moment like that, where you didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't even defend yourself, because deep down, you already knew the truth? Have you ever stayed quiet? Not because you had nothing to say, but because saying it would change everything. Because that's exactly where Evelyn stood. Not shocked, not confused, just finally seeing clearly. Marcus finally set his glass down. "It's not what it looks like," he said. A sentence so familiar. It barely sounded like meaning anymore. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around the small ceramic piggy bank in her hand, the one he had handed her just minutes earlier, in front of everyone. A gift so small. It didn't just feel cheap. It felt intentional. What kind of man humiliates his wife in public and calls it nothing? What kind of woman stays when she's seen exactly where she stands? And more importantly, what happens when the quietest person in the room decides she's done being silent? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about silence, the kind that protects you until it starts destroying you. It's about love, the kind that isn't loud, isn't dramatic, but slowly fades when it's never spoken. And most importantly, it's about the moment a woman realizes she's been settling for less, and what happens when she finally chooses herself. If you've ever felt unseen in a relationship, if you've ever stayed longer than you should have, or loved someone who stopped choosing you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story, because this one is going to stay with you. And when you're done listening, I want you to tell me in the comments, what would you have done in her place? Because what Evelyn Carter did next, no one saw coming, and it didn't start with anger. It started with something far more dangerous. Silence. Evelyn didn't repeat the question. She didn't need to. The silence that followed had already said everything twice. Around them, the Easter event continued, but softer now, like the world itself had taken a cautious step back. Conversations dipped into murmurs. A few guests turned away politely, pretending not to notice. Others leaned in just enough to hear without being obvious. Marcus exhaled slowly, as if buying himself time. It was a business gesture, he said finally. Calm, measured, controlled. Evelyn nodded once. Business. That word had built their entire life. It had bought the house they stood in, funded the events, filled the closets, secured the future. It was the word Marcus used whenever something didn't need to be explained. Only accepted. She lowered her gaze briefly to the piggy bank in her hand. It was smooth, light, almost delicate. Something you'd give a child learning the value of coins, not a wife of 12 years. "I see," she said. And she did. That was the problem. Outside, the Rolls-Royce gleamed under the late morning sun, impossible to ignore, even from inside. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a declaration wrapped in chrome and silence. Earlier, when it had been unveiled, the crowd had erupted. Applause, laughter, surprise. Sabrina Vale had covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide, her joy unfiltered. She had stepped forward without hesitation, wrapping her arms around Marcus, like the moment belonged entirely to her. Evelyn had clapped too, softly, politely, exactly the way she always did. No one had noticed the difference. Or maybe they had, and simply didn't say anything. Marcus shifted his weight. "It was public relations," he added. "You know how these things work." Evelyn looked back at him. Yes, she did know how things worked. That was why she hadn't interrupted when he first mentioned Sabrina months ago. Not directly, not clearly, but enough, a name appearing more often. A tone slightly lighter when he spoke about certain meetings. Late nights explained with just enough detail to sound reasonable. Evelyn had understood long before she allowed herself to acknowledge it. But understanding, to her, had always meant enduring. "What about this?" she asked, lifting the piggy bank slightly. Not accusing, just present. Marcus glanced at it, then back at her. "It's symbolic." "Of what?" A pause. "For saving," he said. She almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because of how carefully he avoided the truth. Saving. As if she had been given something to build toward, as if she hadn't already given years. A server passed by, offering drinks. Marcus took one automatically. Evelyn shook her head. The music resumed somewhere in the background, soft piano, elegant, intentional, the kind of sound designed to smooth over discomfort. It didn't. Evelyn, Marcus said, lowering his voice slightly. This isn't the place. She nodded again. Of course it wasn't. There was never a place. Not for this. Not for anything that required more than composure. I'm not making a scene, she replied. And she wasn't. That was what made it so easy for him. They stood side by side now, facing outward instead of each other, like a couple posing rather than connecting. From a distance, they looked perfect. Refined, balanced, untouched by conflict. Up close, there was a space between them that hadn't been there before. Small, but real. People are watching, Marcus murmured. Evelyn followed his gaze. Yes, they were. Not openly, not rudely. But curiosity has a way of disguising itself as casual attention. She wondered, briefly, what they saw. A successful man, a graceful wife, a beautiful event, or something else. Something quieter, something breaking. Then let them, she said softly. Marcus turned to her slightly, surprised, not by the words, but by the tone. There was no sharpness in it, no emotion he could easily categorize. Just steadiness. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Evelyn set the piggy bank down on the nearest table, carefully, as if it mattered, as if it still held value. I'm going to get some air, she said. Marcus hesitated. Do you want me to? No, it wasn't harsh. It was just complete. And for the first time, he didn't follow. Outside, the sunlight felt different, quieter, real. Evelyn stepped onto the stone pathway, the sounds of the event fading slightly behind her. The Rolls-Royce stood a few feet away, surrounded by admiration even now. A couple posed beside it for photos. Someone laughed. Sabrina's voice carried faintly from somewhere nearby. Light, effortless, untouched by hesitation. Evelyn stopped, not too close, just enough to see. The car was beautiful. There was no denying that. Every detail polished, every line intentional. It was the kind of gift that said something without needing explanation. That was what struck her most. It said something, clearly, confidently, without silence. She folded her arms lightly, not against the cold but against something else, something she hadn't fully named yet. For years, she had accepted the language of quiet. Small gestures, subtle acknowledgements, unspoken agreements. She had believed that not needing more made her strong, that not asking made her easy to love. That understanding without explanation was a kind of closeness. But standing there now, watching a gesture so loud it echoed without words, she felt something shift. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity. Beautiful, isn't it? Evelyn turned slightly. Sabrina stood a few steps away, her expression warm, almost friendly. Up close, she looked exactly as she always did, composed, confident, entirely at ease in her own presence. Yes, Evelyn said. It is. Sabrina smiled, glancing at the car. He didn't have to do all this. No, he didn't. Evelyn nodded politely. I wasn't expecting anything like it. Evelyn believed her. That was what made it easier. You must be surprised, Sabrina added, her tone softening just a fraction, as if acknowledging something unspoken between them. Evelyn met her eyes. I am, she said. Another pause. But this one felt different from the others. Less protective, more revealing. Sabrina shifted slightly, then offered a small, almost respectful smile before stepping back toward the crowd. No hostility, no confrontation, just understanding, of a kind neither of them would say out loud. Evelyn remained where she was. The breeze moved lightly through her hair. Somewhere behind her, laughter rose again, the event returning to its rhythm. Life continuing, as it always did. She looked once more at the car, then back toward the house, toward the man she had built a life with, not through grand gestures, but through years of quiet consistency. And for the first time, she questioned whether silence had truly been a strength, or just something she had learned to survive with. Inside, Marcus stood exactly where she had left him, but something in his expression had changed. Not panic, not guilt, just awareness. He glanced toward the door, as if expecting her to return at any moment. She didn't, and for the first time in a long while, the silence between them didn't feel shared. It felt separate. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then, without rushing, without hesitation, she began to walk, not away from the house, not yet, but not standing still anymore either, and that alone was new. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, if you've ever convinced yourself that understanding was enough, pause for a second and ask yourself, at what cost? Because sometimes, the moment you stop speaking is the moment you start disappearing, and Evelyn Carter had just begun to realize. She had been fading for a long time. She just hadn't said it. Yet, Evelyn didn't go far. Just around the side of the house, where the music softened and the voices blurred into something distant enough to ignore. The stone path curved toward a quiet garden, one she had helped design years ago but rarely visited anymore. It used to be her favorite place. Before life became scheduled, before silence became routine instead of refuge. She stopped beside a low bench, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge before she sat. The air felt different here, less curated, less watched. For the first time that day, no one was looking at her, and for a brief moment, she didn't know what to do with that. Inside, Marcus finally moved. He set his untouched drink down and adjusted his jacket, not because it needed it, but because he needed something to do with his hands. "Everything all right?" one of his associates asked, stepping closer with a polite smile. Marcus nodded automatically. Of course, because that was the expectation. Everything was always fine. That was how success looked. But his gaze drifted again, toward the door Evelyn had walked through. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't accused him, hadn't even stayed long enough to force a conversation. And, somehow, that unsettled him more than anything else could have. Across the room, Sabrina laughed softly at something someone said, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a guest as if she belonged there effortlessly. Marcus watched her for a second, then looked away, because for the first time, the contrast felt louder, not in sound, but in meaning. Outside, Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on her knees. She wasn't crying. That part surprised her. There was no sharp pain, no dramatic wave of emotion crashing over her, just a quiet heaviness, the kind that settles slowly, like something you've been carrying for years but only just realized the weight of. She thought about the piggy bank, how light it had felt in her hand, how easy it would be to dismiss it, to call it harmless, symbolic, even thoughtful in a strange way. But it wasn't just the object. It was what it represented, a life reduced to something small, contained, expected to hold value without ever being filled. Footsteps approached softly behind her. Evelyn didn't turn. She knew who it was. Marcus stopped a few feet away, giving her space, but not leaving. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said. She let out a slow breath. "I'm not upset." And she wasn't. Not in the way he understood. Marcus frowned slightly. "Then what is it?" That question lingered between them, because for once, she wasn't sure how to answer in a way that would keep things simple. She turned her head just enough to look at him. "Do you remember the last time we had a real conversation?" Marcus hesitated. "We talk all the time." Evelyn shook her head gently. "No. We exchange information." Another pause. This one landed. Marcus stepped closer, his expression tightening. Not defensive, just uncertain. "That's not fair." Evelyn looked back ahead, her voice still calm. "I didn't say it to be fair." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You've never complained about it." There it was, the truth he had built everything on. She almost smiled again, but softer this time. "I know." Silence returned, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't protecting them now. It was exposing them. "I thought you were happy," Marcus said after a moment. Evelyn considered that. "I was comfortable." The distinction settled heavily between them. Comfortable. Not fulfilled, not seen, just undisturbed. Marcus looked away briefly, as if searching for something solid to hold on to in a conversation that suddenly had no clear structure. "You've always been this way," he said. "Quiet, understanding. You never needed more." Evelyn finished gently. He didn't respond, because he didn't know how to. She stood slowly, turning to face him fully now. "That wasn't strength, Marcus," she said. "It was habit." He met her eyes, something shifting behind his usual composure. "What are you saying?" Evelyn paused, not because she didn't have words, but because she was choosing them carefully. For once, not to protect him, but to express herself. "I'm saying," she began, her voice steady, "that just because I didn't ask, doesn't mean I didn't feel." The air between them stilled. That sentence, simple, quiet, carried more weight than anything she had ever said to him. Marcus swallowed slightly. "I didn't realize." "I know." She didn't let him finish. Not sharply. Just honestly. And somehow, that felt more final than interruption. A faint breeze moved through the garden again, brushing past them like a reminder that time was still moving, even if they had both stood still for too long. "You could have told me," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Yes. And you didn't?" Another nod. "No." They stood there, facing the truth from opposite sides. Neither of them wrong. Neither of them fully right. "That's not all on me," Marcus added, quieter now. "It isn't," she agreed. And that surprised him, because he had expected blame. Instead, he got clarity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Not out of avoidance this time, but because they were both thinking, really thinking, maybe for the first time in years. From inside, the sound of applause rose again. Another moment, another distraction, another reason to step away from something real. Marcus glanced toward the house. Evelyn didn't. She stayed exactly where she was, grounded, present, unmoving. "I should go back," he said finally. She nodded. "Of course." He hesitated, as if expecting something more, a request, a reaction, a reason to stay. She didn't give him one. Marcus lingered for a second longer, then turned and walked away. Evelyn watched him leave, not with resentment, not even with disappointment, just awareness. When he disappeared back inside, she exhaled slowly, and for the first time that day, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. She looked down at her empty hands. No piggy bank, nothing to hold on to. And somehow, that felt right. Inside, Marcus re-entered the room to the same polished world he had stepped out of minutes ago. But it didn't feel the same. The laughter sounded sharper. The conversations more hollow. Even the Rolls-Royce, still admired, still perfect, felt different now, like something that had cost more than money. Sabrina approached him again, her expression warm. "Hey," she said softly, "are you okay?" Marcus looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he didn't answer immediately. Outside, Evelyn remained in the garden a while longer, not hiding, not avoiding, just sitting with something she had spent years pushing aside. Because sometimes, the most important moment in a person's life isn't when everything falls apart. It's when they finally stop pretending it hasn't. Evelyn wasn't leaving. Not yet. She wasn't making decisions. Not yet. But something had changed. Something quiet. Something irreversible. She had spoken, and once you find your voice, even in the smallest way, silence never feels the same again. If you've ever stayed quiet just to keep a relationship together, tell me, was it worth it? Or did it cost you more than you realized? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because this story is just getting started. If that moment just hit you, you're not alone. Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken up? Go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Evelyn's place? The first time Evelyn learned to stay quiet, she was 8 years old. You don't need to say everything you feel. Her mother's voice wasn't harsh. It was tired. That was what made it stick. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast that morning. Not badly burned, just enough to leave a faint bitterness in the air. Evelyn stood near the counter, her small hands wrapped around a glass of milk she hadn't touched. Across the room, her parents weren't yelling. That was the strange part. They were speaking in low voices. Controlled, careful, almost polite. But somehow, that felt worse. "What did I say?" her father asked, his tone flat. "It's not just what you said," her mother replied, wiping her hands on a towel that didn't need wiping. "It's how you said it." A pause. "You always do this," her father added. "And you never listen," her mother answered. Neither of them looked at each other. Neither of them looked at Evelyn, but she felt it anyway. The tension, the pressure, the invisible line stretched too tight between two people who once knew how to speak without hurting each other. Evelyn took a small step forward. "I think." Her voice was soft, careful, but it was enough. Both of them turned, not angry, not even surprised, just interrupted. And in that moment, something shifted. "Evelyn," her mother said gently, "go sit down. I just wanted to—" "You don't need to say everything you feel." The words landed quietly, but they didn't leave. That was the beginning, not of silence, but of understanding. Evelyn learned quickly that words had weight, more than she realized. That speaking didn't always fix things. Sometimes it made them worse. Sometimes it added fuel to something already burning. So she adjusted. At first, it was small. She stopped interrupting, stopped offering opinions unless she was asked, stopped finishing sentences that weren't hers. Then it became something more. She started observing instead of reacting, listening instead of expressing, absorbing instead of questioning. And something interesting happened. The house became calmer, not peaceful, but manageable. Her parents still argued, but less around her. Her presence stopped triggering tension. She became easy. And children notice things like that. They notice what gets rewarded. They notice what keeps things from breaking. By the time she was 12, Evelyn had mastered the art of quiet. Teachers loved her. She's so well behaved. Very mature for her age. Never causes trouble. Friends confided in her. "You're such a good listener. I feel like you understand me." No one ever said, "I wish you'd tell me how you feel." Because she didn't, and no one asked. One afternoon her mother found her sitting by the window reading. "You've been very quiet lately," she said. Evelyn looked up, a small smile forming automatically. "I'm okay." Her mother studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good. That was it. No follow-up. No deeper question. Just acceptance. Because quiet children are easy to raise. They don't challenge. They don't demand. They don't complicate things. And over time, Evelyn began to understand something without anyone ever explaining it to her. Being easy made people stay. But there was another lesson too, one she didn't recognize until much later. Being easy also made people overlook you. At 16, Evelyn experienced her first real heartbreak. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no betrayal, just absence. His name was Daniel. He sat behind her in class, always tapping his pen lightly against the desk, like he had too many thoughts and nowhere to put them. He talked more than she did, which made things simpler. He liked that she listened. She liked that he filled the silence. They started spending time together, after school, between classes, small moments that slowly built into something neither of them named right away. It felt safe, natural, effortless, until it didn't. I just feel like I don't really know you. The words came out of nowhere. They were sitting on a bench outside the school, the late afternoon sun stretching shadows across the pavement. Evelyn blinked slightly. What do you mean? Daniel shrugged, not looking at her. You're always there. You listen, you smile. But I don't know what you think. Or what you want. Or anything, really. She frowned, confused. I'm here with you. I know, he said. But it's like, you're only halfway here. That didn't make sense to her. She gave him her time, her attention, her presence. What else was there? I just wish you'd say more, he added. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she didn't know what to say. Not because she had nothing to feel, but because she had never practiced putting those feelings into words. Daniel waited. A few seconds, then a few more. And in that silence, he sighed. That's what I mean. They didn't argue. They didn't fight. They just faded. Conversations became shorter. Time together became less frequent. Until one day, they stopped completely. Evelyn told herself it was fine, that it hadn't been serious, that people drift apart all the time. And in a way, that was true. But deep down, a small question remained. What if she had said something? She never answered it. Instead, she learned something else. Something quieter. If you don't speak, you can't say the wrong thing. And for Evelyn, that felt like safety. Years later, that same belief followed her into adulthood, into relationships, into choices, into love. By the time she met Marcus Carter, silence wasn't just something she used. It was who she had become. And Marcus? He didn't question it, didn't challenge it, didn't ask her to change. Because for a man like him, a woman who didn't demand, didn't argue, didn't complicate, was exactly what he thought he needed. And Evelyn? She thought she had finally found a place where her quiet nature wasn't just accepted, but valued. What she didn't realize was that being understood and being seen are not the same thing. And the difference between those two would eventually cost her everything. If you've ever learned to stay quiet just to keep the peace, ask yourself this. Did it protect you, or did it slowly erase you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because this story is unfolding layer by layer, and what comes next will explain everything you thought you understood about love. Evelyn didn't notice when silence stopped being a choice. It didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where she decided, this is who I'll be. It was quieter than that, slower. It became habit, and then identity. In college, people described her the same way they always had. Calm, easy to be around, drama-free. At first, she took it as a compliment. Who wouldn't want to be seen as peaceful in a world that constantly felt loud? But there was something else hidden underneath those words. Something no one said out loud. She was easy, because she required nothing. Her roommate, Lila, was the opposite. Expressive, loud when she laughed, louder when she was upset. Evelyn, how do you not react to anything? Lila asked one night, pacing their small dorm room. Evelyn sat cross-legged on her bed, flipping through a book. I do react. No, you don't, Lila said. You process. That's different. Evelyn looked up, slightly confused. What's the difference? Lila stopped pacing. Processing is internal, she said. Reacting is letting people see it. Evelyn thought about that. She had always believed that keeping things inside was maturity, control, strength. But the way Lila said it made it sound like distance. Doesn't it get exhausting? Lila added, what? Feeling everything and showing none of it. Evelyn hesitated because she had never allowed herself to frame it that way. Exhausting. That word lingered longer than she expected. She didn't answer, and Lila didn't push, because even then, Evelyn had already mastered the art of ending conversations without saying anything at all. Her relationships in college followed a pattern. She was present, attentive, supportive, but never fully known. Guys liked her. They admired her calm, her patience, her ability to listen without interrupting. But eventually, something always felt missing. "You're hard to read." That was the most common phrase, not said with frustration, not even with blame, just observation. Evelyn used to nod when she heard it, as if it were a neutral fact, not a warning. One evening, during her final year, she sat across from someone she had been seeing for a few months. His name was Aaron. He was kind, steady, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice or rush his words. On paper, they made sense. In reality, something felt incomplete. "I feel like I'm always guessing with you," Aaron said, gently stirring his coffee. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Guessing what? How you feel, what you want, where this is going." She folded her hands on the table. "I'm here, aren't I?" Aaron smiled faintly. "Yeah, you are." A pause. "But sometimes, it feels like that's all you are." The words weren't meant to hurt, but they landed anyway, because deep down, she understood them. "I don't want to push you," he continued, "but I need more than silence, Evelyn. I need to know you." Know you. The phrase echoed in her mind. She wasn't sure how to respond, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know how to translate what she felt into something visible, something shareable, something vulnerable. "I don't think I can give you that," she said quietly. Aaron studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then I don't think this is going to work." Just like that. No argument, no drama, just clarity. And once again, silence remained intact, but something else slipped away with it. That night, Evelyn lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not crying, not overwhelmed, just thinking. Why was it so hard? Why did something as simple as expressing emotion feel so complicated? The answer, though she didn't fully articulate it yet, was rooted in everything she had learned growing up. Speaking created risk. Silence created safety. And, over time, she had chosen safety every single time. But safety came with a cost, one she was only beginning to understand. When you don't express your needs, people assume you don't have any. When you don't voice your feelings, people stop trying to understand them. And when you stay silent long enough, people stop looking for you entirely. Evelyn wasn't invisible, but she was easy to overlook. After graduation, life moved forward the way it always does. Opportunities came, choices were made, and eventually, she met Marcus Carter. Their first meeting was simple. No sparks, no dramatic moment, just alignment. He didn't ask too many questions. She didn't offer too many answers, and somehow, that worked. Marcus admired her calm nature, her ability to stay composed, her lack of emotional demands. Evelyn appreciated his structure, his certainty, the way he filled spaces she didn't know how to occupy. They didn't talk about feelings. They didn't define expectations. They didn't ask for more than what was given. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt like she wasn't too quiet. She felt accepted, but acceptance without understanding is fragile, because what feels peaceful in the beginning can become empty over time, and what feels easy can slowly become invisible. Evelyn didn't see it then, didn't question it, didn't push for more, because everything she had learned told her, if it's not broken, don't touch it. But what she didn't realize was that something could be incomplete and still look perfectly fine from the outside. And years later, standing in that garden on Easter morning, holding the weight of everything she had never said, she finally understood something that had been quietly shaping her entire life. Silence doesn't just protect you from conflict, it also prevents connection. And without connection, even love begins to fade. If you've ever struggled to express yourself, if you've ever felt misunderstood simply because you didn't speak up, ask yourself this: are you protecting your peace or avoiding your truth? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because this story is not just about Evelyn. It's about anyone who's ever stayed silent and paid the price for it. Don't explain yourself. Win, and they'll understand. Marcus Carter learned that before he learned how to apologize. He was 10 years old, standing at the edge of a glass-walled office that overlooked half the city. The building didn't belong to his family yet, but his father spoke as if it already did. "You see that?" his father said, pointing toward the skyline. "That's where you're going." Marcus followed his finger, not fully understanding, but nodding anyway, because that was what you did. You agreed, you adapted, you moved forward. His father wasn't unkind, he was efficient. Every conversation had a purpose, every lesson had a direction, every mistake had a consequence. Not emotional, but practical. "You don't need people to like you," he would say. "You need them to respect you." And respect, in his world, wasn't earned through vulnerability. It was earned through results. Marcus grew up in rooms where voices were sharp and decisions were quick. Boardrooms, negotiations, late-night calls where tone mattered more than truth. He watched men speak over each other, interrupt, dominate, and win. He also watched the ones who hesitated. They didn't last long. So Marcus learned early. Emotion slows you down. Hesitation costs you. Silence, when used right, gives you control. But his silence wasn't like Evelyn's. Hers was protective. His was strategic. At 13, Marcus made his first real mistake. Not in business, in trust. He had a friend, Ethan. They had grown up together, attended the same schools, shared the same expectations placed on them by powerful families. Ethan was different, though. Less guarded, more open. He laughed louder, spoke freely, said things Marcus would never say out loud. At first, Marcus admired that. It felt easy. One afternoon they sat on the steps outside school, the day stretching lazily in front of them. "You ever feel like this is all too much?" Ethan asked, tossing a pebble across the pavement. Marcus frowned slightly. "Too much? How?" "Like, we're already expected to be something we haven't even figured out yet." Marcus shrugged. "That's the point." Ethan shook his head. "No, that's the pressure." A pause. Then Ethan added quietly, "Sometimes I wish I could just say I don't have it all together." Marcus didn't respond, because in his world, that wasn't something you said. A few weeks later, Marcus repeated that conversation, not out of malice, not intentionally, but in a room where information was currency and vulnerability was weakness. He mentioned Ethan's doubts, just casually, just enough. It spread faster than he expected. Ethan stopped talking to him. No confrontation, no explanation, just distance. When Marcus finally approached him, confused, Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just said, "I thought I could trust you," and walked away. That moment stayed with Marcus, not because he felt deeply guilty, but because he learned something important. What people share in confidence can cost them everything. So he adjusted. He stopped encouraging openness, stopped engaging in conversations that required emotional risk, stopped placing himself in situations where words could be used against him. And slowly, he became someone who listened, but rarely revealed, spoke, but only when necessary, connected, but never too deeply. By the time he entered adulthood, Marcus Carter had mastered control, not just in business. In life, success came naturally, or at least it looked that way from the outside. He built his first company in his late 20s, expanded it before 30, multiplied it before most people his age had figured out their direction. People admired him, respected him, followed him, but no one truly knew him. And that was by design. Then came his first serious relationship. Her name was Natalie. She was everything his world wasn't. Warm, expressive, emotionally present in a way that both intrigued and unsettled him. At first, it worked. She brought something different into his life. Something softer, something less structured. "You don't have to be on all the time," she told him once, brushing her fingers lightly against his hand. Marcus gave a small smile. "That's how I got here." She shook her head. "That's how you built your career, not how you build a relationship." He didn't argue, but he didn't change either. Natalie tried. She asked questions, shared openly, encouraged him to do the same. But every time the conversation moved towards something deeper, Marcus redirected it, not aggressively, not obviously, just enough to keep things comfortable, controlled. "You never really let me in," she said one evening, her voice quieter than usual. Marcus frowned. "I'm here, aren't I?" The same words Evelyn would later use, the same misunderstanding. Natalie shook her head slowly. "Being here isn't the same as being open." Marcus didn't know how to respond, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't understand what she was asking for. To him, love was presence, provision, consistency. To her, it was connection, expression, vulnerability. They weren't speaking the same language. "I can't keep guessing how you feel," she said. He looked at her, confused. "Why does everything have to be said?" "Because silence doesn't answer anything," she replied. That sentence stayed with him, but not in the way she intended. Instead of learning to open up, Marcus learned something else. If people need more than you can give, they'll leave. And Natalie did. No shouting, no chaos, just a quiet ending to something that never fully began. Marcus told himself it was for the best, that she wanted too much. That emotional complexity wasn't necessary for a successful life. And over time, he refined his approach. He chose environments where he was in control. He built relationships that didn't require emotional negotiation. He surrounded himself with people who valued what he could provide, not what he struggled to express. And then, he met Evelyn. She didn't ask, didn't push, didn't require explanations he didn't know how to give. With her, there was no pressure to perform emotionally, no expectations he couldn't meet. Just quiet, steady, predictable. And for Marcus Carter, that felt like the perfect kind of love. What he didn't realize was that silence can feel like peace, until it starts hiding everything that matters. And one day, that silence would come back to him, not as control, but as distance. Because when two people both avoid saying what they feel, they don't stay safe, they slowly grow apart. If you've ever believed that providing is enough, or that love doesn't need to be spoken, ask yourself this: can someone truly feel loved if they're never told, never heard, and never understood? Marcus didn't think he was doing anything wrong. That was the part no one ever saw. From the outside, his life looked precise, structured, intentional, successful. Every decision had logic behind it. Every move had purpose. And, when it came to marriage, he believed he had done it right. You need stability, his father had told him years earlier, not complications. Marcus took that seriously. He didn't want unpredictability, didn't want emotional swings, didn't want a relationship that demanded constant explanation. So when he met Evelyn Carter, it felt like alignment. Their first real conversation was quiet, not awkward, not forced, just calm. "You don't talk much," Marcus observed. Evelyn gave a small smile. "Neither do you." He nodded once, and somehow, that was enough. There were no long emotional discussions, no need to impress, no pressure to perform. Dinner conversations were simple: work, daily observations, occasional shared thoughts. Nothing overwhelming, nothing complicated. And Marcus liked that, because for the first time, he didn't feel like he was being asked for something he didn't know how to give. Evelyn never questioned his late nights, never pressed for details, never asked him to explain things he assumed she wouldn't understand anyway. And to Marcus, that felt like trust. But it wasn't trust. It was silence. And silence, when misunderstood, can look like acceptance. As their relationship grew, Marcus began to rely on that quiet. It made everything easier. No arguments, no emotional demands, no need to navigate uncomfortable conversations. He provided, she supported, and in his mind, that was balance. "You're lucky," one of his colleagues told him once. "Most women would give you problems." Marcus glanced at Evelyn across the room that evening, calm, composed, speaking softly to a guest. "She doesn't," he replied. And he meant it. What he didn't realize was that not causing problems is not the same as not having them. Their wedding was elegant, refined, predictable. No dramatic vows, no emotional declarations, just commitment. Evelyn stood beside him, steady as ever. Marcus placed the ring on her finger. And in that moment, he believed he had chosen right. Because love to him wasn't about intensity. It was about longevity, control, consistency. And Evelyn fit perfectly into that equation. Their early years of marriage were smooth, almost too smooth. Mornings were quiet. Evenings were structured. Weekends followed a rhythm that never changed. Evelyn handled the home with quiet precision. Marcus handled everything outside of it. They didn't interfere with each other's roles, didn't question each other's choices, didn't disrupt the system they had built. And because nothing was breaking, Marcus assumed everything was working. But there's something people often misunderstand about relationships. Just because there's no conflict doesn't mean there's connection. Evelyn noticed the gaps first, not loudly, not urgently, just subtly. Conversations became shorter, moments became quieter, not in a comforting way, but in an empty one. Marcus would come home late, sit beside her, and scroll through his phone while she read a book. They were together, but not engaged. At first, she told herself it was normal. Life gets busy, people get tired. But then weeks turned into months, and months into years, and somewhere along the way, silence stopped feeling like peace. It started to feel like distance. "Do you ever feel like we're just existing?" Evelyn asked once. Marcus looked up from his laptop, slightly confused. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then shook her head lightly. "Nothing." That moment passed, like so many others. Marcus didn't press, because pressing meant entering a conversation he wasn't comfortable navigating. And Evelyn didn't insist, because insisting meant risking disruption. So they both returned to what they knew best: silence. But silence has a way of growing. It fills spaces that words should occupy. It replaces questions with assumptions. It turns small uncertainties into lasting distance. And over time, it became easier for Marcus to stay late at work, easier to travel more frequently, easier to exist outside the emotional expectations of home. That's where Sabrina came in. She didn't enter his life dramatically. No sudden spark. No intense connection. Just difference. Sabrina spoke freely, laughed without restraint, asked questions Evelyn never asked. "You're always so serious," she teased once, leaning back in her chair. Marcus gave a small smile. "That's how I stay ahead." She tilted her head. "Maybe. Or maybe it's how you stay guarded." The comment lingered, not because it offended him, but because it felt unfamiliar. Sabrina didn't accept silence the way Evelyn did. She challenged it, played with it, filled it, and for Marcus, that felt refreshing, not better, just different. He didn't think of it as betrayal. Not at first. To him, it was just another compartment. Another part of his life that didn't interfere with the rest, because that was how he had always lived. Controlled, separated, managed. What he didn't understand was that emotions don't stay contained, and silence doesn't erase problems. It delays them. By the time Evelyn stood in that garden on Easter morning, watching the consequences of everything left unsaid, Marcus still believed he was in control. But control, without awareness, is just illusion. Because while he was managing appearances, something real had already started slipping away, and the most dangerous part, he didn't even realize it yet. If you've ever believed that avoiding conflict keeps a relationship strong, think again. Because sometimes, what you avoid becomes exactly what breaks you. The first crack didn't sound like anything. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no moment anyone could point to and say, "That's when it started." It came quietly, the way most important things do. "Will you be home for dinner?" Evelyn stood by the kitchen counter, phone pressed gently to her ear. Her voice was soft, steady, the same way it always was. On the other end, Marcus didn't answer immediately. She could hear the faint echo of movement, voices in the background, the distant hum of a busy office. "I'll try," he said. Try. That word used to mean something different. Now it sounded like no, just dress more politely. "What time?" she asked. Another pause. "Don't wait for me." Evelyn nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "All right." The call ended. No goodbye. No follow-up. Just done. She stood there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the dark screen of her phone, not expecting it to ring again. Just holding it. Dinner was already half prepared, not because she was certain he would come, but because part of her still moved on habit. Routine had become its own kind of hope. She turned back to the stove, lowering the heat slightly. There was no frustration in her movements, no sharp gestures, just quiet adjustment. That was how it started, not with anger, but with adaptation. Marcus didn't notice at first, not because he didn't care, but because nothing looked wrong. The house was still in order, meals were still prepared, Evelyn was still calm, still present, still easy. So when work demanded more time, more focus, more attention, he gave it, without hesitation. "You've been staying late a lot," one of his partners remarked casually. Marcus shrugged. Expansion phase. That explained everything. In his world, growth justified absence. And at home, silence justified everything else. Weeks passed, then months. The dinners Evelyn prepared became fewer, not out of resentment, but out of recognition. There was no point cooking for two when one rarely showed up. Instead, she adjusted again. Simpler meals, later hours, less expectation, and each adjustment felt small, reasonable, understandable. But small changes have a way of adding up. One evening, Marcus came home earlier than usual. Not intentionally, just a cancelled meeting. He stepped into the house, loosening his tie slightly, expecting the familiar quiet, and he found it. Evelyn sat on the couch, a book open in her hands. The lamp beside her cast a soft glow across the room. Everything looked the same. "You're home early," she said, glancing up briefly. Marcus nodded. Meeting got pushed. She nodded back, and returned to her book. He stood there for a second, waiting. For what? He wasn't sure. A question, a conversation, something. It didn't come, so he moved on. Later that night, they sat side by side at dinner. The silence wasn't new, but it felt different, not comfortable, not shared, just present. Marcus cleared his throat. "How was your day?" Evelyn looked up. "Good." A pause. "And yours?" "Busy." She nodded, and that was it. Two people. One table. No connection. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. And moments like that began to repeat. Short conversations, surface-level exchanges, long stretches of nothing in between. At first, Marcus told himself it was normal. Marriage settles. Life stabilizes. Things become predictable. But predictable and disconnected are not the same thing. Evelyn noticed it more clearly, not because she was looking for it, but because she felt it. The absence of curiosity, the lack of presence, the quiet shift from together to coexisting. One night, she found herself standing in the doorway of Marcus's study. He was working, as usual, focused, uninterrupted. She almost spoke. The words were there, forming, ready, do you feel it too? But she didn't say it, because somewhere deep inside, that old belief surfaced again. Don't disrupt the peace. So she stepped back, and let the moment pass. Marcus never knew she had been there, and that became the pattern. Moments that almost turned into conversations, but didn't. Feelings that almost became words, but stayed unspoken. And over time, those almosts became distance, not loud, not visible, but undeniable. Then came the first real sign, not to Marcus, to Evelyn. It was a simple thing, so small it could have been ignored. But it wasn't. Marcus forgot their anniversary. Not completely. He remembered. Eventually, late that night, after a long day, after several meetings, after everything else that had taken priority, it crossed his mind. He walked into the bedroom, slightly tired, slightly distracted. Evelyn was already there, sitting quietly. I meant to mention earlier, he said, loosening his watch. Happy anniversary. She looked at him, not hurt, not surprised, just aware. Thank you, she replied. That was it. No confrontation, no disappointment expressed, just acceptance. And Marcus misread it. He assumed it didn't matter to her, that she wasn't the type to care about dates or gestures, because she hadn't said anything. But what he didn't understand was that silence doesn't mean something doesn't hurt. Sometimes, it just means the person has learned not to expect better. That night, Evelyn lay awake longer than usual, not thinking about the anniversary itself, but about what it represented. A moment that should have meant something, reduced to an afterthought. And still, she said nothing, because that was what she knew. But something inside her shifted again, quietly, slowly, irreversibly. Because every time you stay silent, you teach people how little they need to show up for you. And Marcus, without realizing it, was learning that lesson perfectly. If you've ever excused someone's behavior just to keep things smooth, ask yourself, are you maintaining peace or lowering your standards? Sabrina didn't arrive like a disruption. She arrived like a contrast. Marcus met her on a Thursday afternoon, not at a party, not through friends, not in a moment that felt personal. It was business, a new partnership pitch, a growing brand looking for investment, a room filled with polished presentations and predictable conversations. Marcus had seen dozens like it. He expected nothing different, until she started speaking. She doesn't follow the script, someone whispered beside him. Marcus didn't respond. He was watching. Sabrina stood at the front of the room, not nervous, not overly confident, just present. She didn't rush her words, didn't try to impress with numbers alone. She told a story, not about profit, about people. This isn't just about growth, she said, her voice steady. It's about impact. And impact doesn't come from playing it safe. A few people shifted in their seats. That wasn't the language investors were used to. Marcus leaned back slightly, interested. When the presentation ended, the room filled with polite applause. Questions followed, safe ones, expected ones. Marcus asked something different. What happens when your model fails? He said. Sabrina didn't hesitate. It will, she replied. A few quiet laughs. She didn't smile. And when it does, we adjust. Not because failure is acceptable, but because pretending it won't happen is dishonest. Marcus studied her. No deflection, no over-explanation, just clarity. After the meeting, she approached him directly. I figured you'd ask that, she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. You did? You don't look like someone who believes in perfect plans. He almost smiled. That was the beginning. It wasn't instant, not emotional, not even personal, just different. Sabrina spoke freely, asked questions without hesitation, challenged ideas instead of agreeing with them, and Marcus found himself responding, not out of obligation, but because it felt engaging. You don't talk much, she said one evening after a follow-up meeting. Marcus shrugged lightly. I talk when there's something to say. She tilted her head, or when it's safe to say it. He didn't answer, because, for a second, it felt like she saw something. That made him uncomfortable, but not enough to step away. Over the next few weeks, their interactions increased. Meetings turned into conversations. Conversations turned into time, not intentional, just gradual. Sabrina didn't replace anything in his life. She existed alongside it, and that's what made it easy. At home, nothing changed. Evelyn remained steady, the house remained quiet, life remained structured. There were no arguments, no confrontations, no signs, on the surface, that anything was shifting. But something was. Marcus started staying out later. Not drastically, just enough to extend conversations. He told himself it was work. And, technically, it was, but it didn't feel like work. It felt lighter, because, with Sabrina, he didn't have to guess what she was thinking. She said it. "I think you overanalyze everything," she told him once, leaning back in her chair. Marcus looked at her. "That's how I avoid mistakes." She shook her head. "No, that's how you avoid feeling anything." A pause. Then she added, "You don't strike me as someone who's comfortable with that." Marcus didn't respond. But later that night, the comment stayed with him. At home, Evelyn sat across from him at dinner. The same quiet, the same calm, the same absence of friction. "You're late," she said softly. Marcus nodded. Work ran over. She didn't question it, didn't ask for details, didn't push. "Okay," she said. And just like that, the moment passed. Marcus picked up his glass, took a sip, and for a brief second, something felt off, not wrong, just noticeable. He had grown used to this, the lack of questions, the absence of tension, the ease. But now, after spending time in a space where conversation flowed differently, silence didn't feel the same. It felt incomplete. He didn't say that. He wouldn't have known how. And Evelyn didn't ask, because she still believed. If something needed to be said, it would be. But that's the thing about silence. It creates space. And if that space isn't filled with connection, something else will fill it. Attention, distraction, someone new. Marcus didn't wake up one day and decide to cross a line. He just kept stepping closer to it, conversation by conversation, moment by moment, until one evening, they weren't talking about anything important, just business, strategy, future plans. Sabrina laughed at something he said, not politely, not controlled, just freely. And without thinking, Marcus relaxed, not physically, internally. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to manage the moment. And that's when it shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just subtly, because sometimes the beginning of something isn't marked by a decision. It's marked by a feeling, and feelings, left unexamined, have a way of leading you somewhere you never intended to go. At home, that same night, Evelyn stood in the kitchen, rinsing a glass slowly under running water. The house was quiet. As always, Marcus wasn't back yet. She glanced at the clock, then looked away, not checking, not waiting, just noticing. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like space. And she wasn't sure anymore what was filling it. If you've ever ignored small changes in a relationship, thinking they didn't matter, ask yourself, were they really small? Or were they the beginning of something bigger? It didn't begin with a decision. That would have been easier to define, easier to admit, easier to regret. It began with a moment Marcus didn't question, and that was the problem. "You're staying late again?" Sabrina asked, glancing up from her laptop. Marcus checked his watch. "Just finishing a few things." She smiled faintly. "You always say that." He didn't respond, because it was true. The office had emptied out hours ago. The city outside had softened into evening, lights flickering on, movement slowing down, the usual rush giving way to something quieter. Marcus leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie slightly. "You could leave, you know," Sabrina added. "The world won't collapse if you take a night off." He almost smiled. "Maybe not," he said. "But things fall behind." She closed her laptop gently. "Or maybe you just don't like going home early." That landed, not sharply, just accurately. Marcus frowned slightly. "That's not it." Sabrina didn't argue. She just looked at him. And that look, it didn't accuse. It didn't challenge. It simply noticed. Silence followed. But this wasn't the kind of silence Marcus was used to. This one wasn't empty. It was observant. "I didn't mean that the way it sounded," he said after a moment. "I know," Sabrina replied. "You don't usually mean things the way they sound." A pause. Then, softer. "You just don't always say what you mean." Marcus exhaled slowly, because that wasn't entirely wrong. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. "I should go." Sabrina nodded. "Yeah." But neither of them moved right away. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just suspended. And instead of leaving, Marcus sat back down. "I'll stay a little longer," he said. Sabrina didn't smile. She just opened her laptop again. "Okay." That's how it started. Not with intention, but with allowance. The next few weeks followed a pattern. Late nights, extended conversations, moments that stretched longer than necessary. They talked about work, at first, then, about things outside of it. "How do you not get tired of all this?" Sabrina asked one night, gesturing vaguely around the office. Marcus looked up from his screen. It's what I built. That's not what I asked. He leaned back slightly. Then what are you asking? She tilted her head. Do you ever feel like there should be more? More, that word again. Marcus didn't answer immediately, because he had spent years defining more in measurable terms. Growth, expansion, success. But that wasn't what she meant. I have everything I need, he said finally. Sabrina studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. That's not the same thing. The conversation ended there, but the thought didn't. At home, Evelyn sat at the dining table, her hands folded loosely in front of her. The plate across from her was untouched. She hadn't planned on waiting, but she had, not intentionally, just habit. When Marcus finally walked in, it was late, later than usual. You're up, he said, surprised. Evelyn nodded. I was reading. He glanced at the table. Did you eat? Yes. A small pause. Then, you? I grabbed something earlier. She nodded again. And just like that, another moment passed. No questions, no tension, no reason to explain. Marcus loosened his tie, heading toward his study. Evelyn watched him for a second, then looked away, because something inside her had started to shift. Not suspicion, not yet, just awareness, the kind you can't quite name, but can't ignore either. Back at the office the next night, the distance between Marcus and Sabrina had changed, not visibly, not obviously, but it was there. They sat closer, spoke longer, paused differently. You ever think about just stopping? She asked, spinning a pen lightly between her fingers. Stopping what? All of it. The constant push, the structure, the control. Marcus shook his head. That's not how things work. She smiled slightly. Or maybe that's just how you've learned to make them work. He looked at her, really looked, this time. There was no expectation in her expression, no demand, just presence. And that felt dangerous, because presence invites honesty. And honesty requires something Marcus had spent years avoiding. Still, he didn't pull away. That was the mistake. One evening, as they left the building together, the air outside felt cooler, quieter. They walked side by side. No rush, no destination. You don't talk about your wife, Sabrina said casually. Marcus's expression didn't change. There's not much to talk about. Is that a good thing? A pause. Then, it's stable. Sabrina nodded slowly. Stable can mean a lot of things. He didn't respond, because he didn't want to define it. Not yet. They reached the parking lot. Marcus stopped beside his car. Sabrina turned toward hers. Another pause. That word again, she said softly. What word? Nothing. She smiled faintly, then walked away. Marcus stood there a moment longer, thinking, but not enough. Because the next day, and the day after that, and the one after that, he came back, stayed later, spoke more, and little by little, the line he never intended to cross became harder to see. At home, Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Her reflection stared back at her, still, composed, but something had changed. She just hadn't said it yet, because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, quietly, patiently, until one day, it becomes impossible to ignore. And that day was getting closer. If you've ever found yourself drifting, without realizing how far you've gone, ask yourself, did it happen suddenly, or did you ignore the signs along the way? Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, because in the next part, the line finally disappears. The line didn't disappear all at once. It faded, like something erased slowly, until there was nothing left to step back from. It was a Friday, not special, not significant, just another late evening that stretched longer than it should have. You're not going home again, are you? Sabrina asked, glancing at Marcus as she gathered her things. Marcus looked at the clock. 9:47 p.m. He hesitated. That hesitation mattered. I'll leave soon, he said. Sabrina studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. She didn't push, didn't question, didn't ask him to stay. And somehow, that made it easier. She walked toward the elevator. Marcus stayed behind. He told himself he had work to finish. He didn't. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The office was quiet now, completely empty. Marcus stared at his screen, not reading, not thinking clearly, just sitting. Then he stood, grabbed his keys, and walked out. He didn't go home. That was the moment. Small, quiet, but irreversible. Outside, the air was cooler than usual. The city had settled into that late-night stillness where everything felt suspended between movement and rest. Marcus spotted Sabrina near the entrance of the building. She hadn't left yet. She leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone. "You're still here," he said. She looked up, slightly surprised. "I could say the same." A pause. Then, "Did you forget something?" Marcus shook his head. "No." Another pause. Longer this time. Neither of them moved. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. "You should go home," Sabrina said quietly. Marcus looked at her. "I know." But he didn't move, and she didn't walk away. Because sometimes, the most important decisions in life aren't made with words. They're made with what you don't stop yourself from doing. "I don't usually do this," Marcus said. Sabrina didn't ask what he meant. She understood. "Neither do I," she replied. Another silence. But this one was different. It wasn't careful. It wasn't controlled. It was allowed. Marcus stepped closer, just slightly, enough to close the space that had been there before. And Sabrina didn't step back. That was all it took. No declarations, no promises, no dramatic moment, just proximity and permission. The line was gone. Later that night, Marcus drove home. The city lights blurred slightly against the windshield as he moved through familiar streets that suddenly didn't feel as familiar. The house was quiet when he walked in. As always, Evelyn sat in the living room, a book open in her lap. She looked up when she heard the door. "You're late," she said. Marcus nodded. "Work." The word came easily. Too easily. Evelyn studied him for a second. Not suspicious, not confrontational, just observant. "Okay," she said, and that was it. No questions, no tension, no interruption. Marcus moved past her, loosening his tie. For a brief moment, he expected something, a reaction, a pause, a shift, but nothing came. And instead of relief, he felt something else, something unfamiliar. Because silence, that once felt like safety, now felt like absence. Evelyn watched him disappear down the hallway. Her expression didn't change, but something inside her did. She didn't know what had happened. Not exactly, but she felt it. The distance, the difference, the subtle shift in energy that couldn't be explained, but couldn't be ignored either. And for the first time, a thought crossed her mind that she didn't push away. Something isn't right. She didn't say it. Not yet. But she didn't dismiss it either. And that was new. Upstairs, Marcus stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. He looked the same. Nothing had changed. But everything had. He exhaled slowly, then turned away, because acknowledging it would mean confronting something he wasn't ready to face. And Marcus Carter had built his entire life on avoiding things he couldn't control. But this wasn't something he could manage. Not anymore. Because once a line is crossed, you don't go back to before. You only decide what happens next. And neither of them was ready for that. If you've ever crossed a line you told yourself you never would, be honest. Was it one big moment, or a series of small ones you ignored? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because in the next chapter, the truth begins to surface. Something just shifted. And you felt it, didn't you? Have you ever noticed a change in someone, but couldn't prove it? Go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Do you trust your instincts in relationships? The change didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with evidence. No messages left open. No lipstick on a collar. No obvious mistake. It arrived as a feeling. Quiet, persistent, impossible to prove, but harder to ignore with each passing day. Evelyn noticed it on a Tuesday, not because anything dramatic happened, but because something didn't. Marcus came home. On time. That alone should have felt normal. Routine. Expected. But it didn't. "Hi," she said from the kitchen, her voice soft as she turned slightly. Marcus nodded. "Hey." He placed his keys down, loosened his tie, moved through the house the same way he always did. Nothing different. And yet, everything felt different. Evelyn watched him for a moment longer than usual. It wasn't suspicion, not fully formed, just awareness. The kind that sits quietly in the back of your mind, waiting for something to confirm it. "Dinner's ready," she said. Marcus nodded again. "Okay." They sat across from each other. The table looked the same. The room felt the same. But something underneath it all wasn't. Evelyn picked up her fork, took a bite. Then she asked, "How was your day?" It was a simple question. One she had asked hundreds of times before, but this time, she paid attention. Marcus didn't look up immediately. Busy. The same answer. The same tone. The same distance. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Anything interesting?" she asked. That question was new. Marcus paused. Just slightly. Not really. And that pause, small as it was, didn't go unnoticed. Evelyn lowered her gaze to her plate, not reacting, not pushing, but registering. Because silence had taught her something over the years. Not just how to stay quiet, but how to listen. And what she heard in that moment wasn't just an answer. It was hesitation, and hesitation always meant something. She didn't confront him, didn't ask again, because that wasn't who she had been, but something inside her shifted, just enough. Later that night, Marcus sat in his study, laptop open, phone beside him. He wasn't working, he was staring at a message. "Sabrina, you disappeared quickly today." He hadn't replied, not yet. He picked up the phone, typed something, deleted it, typed again, paused, then locked the screen, because for the first time, the two parts of his life didn't feel separate. They felt connected, and that made things complicated. Down the hall, Evelyn stood by the bedroom window. The curtains were slightly open, the street outside dimly lit. She wasn't waiting, not exactly, but she wasn't at ease either. Her arms rested lightly against the frame, her expression calm, but her mind active, replaying moments, small ones, insignificant on their own, but together, they formed a pattern. Late nights, short answers, subtle distance, nothing she could point to, but enough to feel, and that feeling was new, because Evelyn had spent years ignoring discomfort. But now, she was noticing it, and noticing changes everything. The next morning, Marcus left early, earlier than usual. "Meeting," he said, grabbing his keys. Evelyn nodded. "Okay." She didn't ask where, didn't ask with who, but as the door closed behind him, she stood there a second longer than necessary, thinking, not reacting, just thinking. And for the first time, a question stayed in her mind longer than her silence could push away. Why does this feel different? At the office, Marcus saw Sabrina. Their eyes met, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough to acknowledge, enough to remember, enough to shift the atmosphere. "Morning," she said lightly. Marcus nodded. "Morning." Nothing more. No one else would have noticed. But they both did. Because once something changes, even silence feels louder. Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat across from Lila. They hadn't seen each other in months. "You look the same," Lila said, smiling. Evelyn returned the smile. "You too." They ordered coffee, sat down, and for a while, it was easy, familiar. But Lila had always been observant. "You're quieter than usual," she said after a moment. Evelyn blinked slightly. "I'm always quiet." Lila shook her head. "No, this is different." A pause. Evelyn looked down at her cup. For years, she would have brushed it off, changed the subject, moved on. But this time, she didn't. "I think something's off," she said quietly. The words felt unfamiliar, not because they weren't true, but because she had never said them out loud before. Lila leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Evelyn hesitated, then said, "I don't know." And that was the truth, because she didn't have proof, didn't have clarity, didn't have answers, just a feeling, and feelings were something she had spent her whole life learning to silence. But now, she wasn't, and that alone was enough to change everything. If you've ever felt like something was wrong, but couldn't explain why, ask yourself, did you ignore it? Or did you finally listen to yourself? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because in the next part, that feeling turns into something undeniable. The feeling didn't go away. It sharpened, not into certainty, but into something harder to ignore. Evelyn didn't wake up that morning with answers. She woke up with awareness. The house was quiet, as usual. Marcus had already left. His side of the bed was neat. Too neat. She stood there for a moment, looking at it. Not searching, not investigating, just noticing. Then she moved on, because she wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. But she was starting to question something she had never questioned before. What happens when silence stops protecting you and starts hiding things from you? She made her coffee, sat at the table, opened a book, but she didn't read. Her mind was somewhere else, replaying, reassembling, reconsidering. Moments she had once dismissed now felt different. The late nights, the shortened conversations, the slight pauses before answers. Nothing concrete, but patterns don't need proof to exist. They just need repetition. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself standing in Marcus's study. She hadn't planned to go in. She just walked there. The room was exactly as he always left it. Ordered, structured, controlled, nothing out of place. Of course not. Marcus didn't live carelessly. That was part of the problem. Evelyn stepped inside slowly. Her fingers brushed lightly across the edge of the desk. She wasn't searching for evidence. She was searching for understanding. There's a difference. Her eyes landed on his phone charger. Empty. She glanced at the chair, the desk, the shelves. Everything looked normal, and yet, she didn't feel normal, because something inside her had changed. For years, she had trusted silence. Now, she was starting to question it, and that question was louder than anything Marcus had said. She turned to leave, paused, then looked back once more. Not for answers, just to acknowledge something she hadn't allowed herself to admit before. I don't know everything about him, and for a long time, she had believed she didn't need to, but now, that felt different. That evening, Marcus came home later than usual. Again, long day, he said, stepping inside. Evelyn nodded. Okay, but this time, she didn't stop there. How long have your days been this long? She asked. The question was simple, but it wasn't routine. Marcus paused, just for a second. Work's been busy, he replied. Evelyn held his gaze, not accusing, not emotional, just present. I know, she said, but it's been different. Another pause. Marcus shifted slightly. What do you mean? Evelyn hesitated, because this was new, not the feeling, but the expression of it. I mean, she began slowly. You've been here less. That was it. No accusation, no assumption, just observation. Marcus exhaled quietly. I told you. We're expanding. It's temporary. Temporary. That word settled between them. Evelyn nodded. But this time, she didn't accept it immediately. How long is temporary? She asked. Marcus frowned slightly. I don't know yet. And there it was again. Not a lie, but not the full truth either. Evelyn looked at him for a moment longer, then said, okay, and turned away, because she wasn't ready to push further. Not yet. But something had changed. She had asked, and once you start asking, silence doesn't work the same way anymore. Later that night, Marcus sat alone in his study again. His phone lit up. Sabrina, you disappeared early. He stared at the message, then looked toward the door. Closed. Quiet. Safe. He picked up the phone. This time, he replied, had to go home. A few seconds passed. Then, do you want to talk? Marcus hesitated, then typed, not tonight. He placed the phone down, but his mind didn't settle, because something felt different, not because of Sabrina, because of Evelyn, the way she had looked at him, the way she had asked, calm, steady, but aware, and awareness was something Marcus had never had to deal with before, because Evelyn had always been quiet, predictable, safe, but now, she wasn't just quiet, she was noticing, and noticing leads to understanding, understanding leads to confrontation, and confrontation was something Marcus had spent his entire life avoiding. Down the hall, Evelyn lay in bed, eyes open, not upset, not emotional, just awake, thinking. For the first time, she didn't push the feeling away. She let it sit, uncomfortable, unclear, but real, and in that quiet space, she admitted something to herself she had never said before. I think something is wrong. Not dramatically, not fearfully, just honestly, and honesty, even when quiet, changes everything. Because once you acknowledge the truth, you can't go back to pretending you don't see it. And Evelyn Carter had just crossed that line. If you've ever felt something was off, and finally admitted it to yourself, tell me, was that the moment things started to fall apart? Or the moment you started to wake up? Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, because in the next chapter, the truth doesn't just sit quietly anymore. Marcus had already decided on the car before anyone ever saw it. Not impulsively, not emotionally, deliberately. That's the one, he said, standing beside the sleek black Rolls-Royce, as the showroom lights reflected perfectly across its surface. The sales director nodded immediately. Excellent choice. Of course it was. Everything Marcus chose was calculated. It'll be ready by Easter, the man added. Marcus adjusted his cuff slightly. Good. It wasn't about the car. Not really. It was about what the car represented. Visibility, impact, control of narrative. Sabrina's company was gaining attention. The partnership was growing. Public perception mattered. And in Marcus's world, perception was everything. A grand gesture wasn't just a gift. It was strategy. What message do you want this to send? The director asked. Marcus paused, then said, that I stand behind what I invest in. Simple, clean, professional, nothing personal, at least, that's what he told himself. But deep down, there was something else, something quieter, because Sabrina didn't ask for anything. She didn't need to. She expressed, she reacted, she responded, and Marcus found himself responding back, not emotionally, but differently. The car wasn't just business, it was acknowledgement of something he hadn't defined, and didn't intend to That was the mistake. Because undefined things have a way of becoming real without permission. Back at the office, a few days before Easter, Marcus reviewed the final details. The reveal will be timed with the event, his assistant explained. Press will be present. Marcus nodded. Make sure it's seamless. Of course. Everything had to be controlled, perfect, predictable, because that's how Marcus managed his life. He didn't leave room for error or emotion, except he had already made one, he just didn't recognize it yet. The night before Easter, Marcus stood in his study. The house was quiet. Evelyn was upstairs. He could hear faint movement, the soft rhythm of someone existing in the same space, but not intruding. That used to feel like peace. Now, it felt like something else. Absence. He glanced at the small box on his desk. Inside, the piggy bank. He had picked it up days earlier. Not planned, not significant, just something he saw while passing through a store. It reminded him of simplicity, of something grounded, different from everything else in his life. He told himself. It was thoughtful, balanced, a contrast to everything extravagant. But now, standing there, it didn't feel like enough. Still, he didn't change it, because changing it would mean reconsidering something deeper. And Marcus Carter didn't revisit decisions once they were made. The next morning, everything unfolded exactly as planned. The guests, the setup, the atmosphere, perfect. Marcus stood at the center of it all, composed, confident, in control. Then came the reveal, the car, the reaction, applause, cameras flashing, energy rising. Sabrina stepped forward, her expression genuine, unfiltered. She laughed, covered her mouth, shook her head slightly in disbelief. You didn't have to do this, she said. Marcus gave a small nod. It's well deserved. Simple, measured. But the moment was anything but, because across the room, Evelyn stood, watching, silent. Marcus glanced at her briefly, just a second, but it was enough. Something in her stillness didn't match the rest of the room. He looked away, because acknowledging it would have disrupted everything. And Marcus didn't disrupt. He maintained. Later, when the piggy bank was handed to Evelyn, Marcus didn't think twice. Not really. He expected her to accept it the way she accepted everything. Calmly, quietly. And she did. That's what made it worse, because her silence didn't challenge him. It confirmed his assumptions, that she didn't need more, didn't expect more, didn't require explanation. But assumptions are only safe when they're true. And this time, they weren't. Back in the present, Marcus sat in his study, the memory replayed, clearer now, sharper, not because the event had changed, but because his understanding of it had. Evelyn's question echoed in his mind. You gave her a $30 million Rolls-Royce, and me a $2 piggy bank? At the time, he had dismissed it, minimized it, but now, it sounded different, not like a complaint, like a realization, and that realization had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with meaning. Marcus leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he didn't feel in control of the situation, because control depends on awareness, and he was only just beginning to understand what he had overlooked. Upstairs, Evelyn sat quietly. The piggy bank rested on the nightstand beside her, unmoved, unopened, unnecessary, but present, a reminder, not of what she received, but of what she hadn't. And for the first time, Marcus and Evelyn were looking at the same moment, from completely different truths, and that gap was no longer silent. If you've ever given something, thinking it was enough, ask yourself, did it truly reflect how you valued that person, or just how you understood them? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because in the next part, we see the same moment through Evelyn's eyes, and everything changes. Evelyn knew something was wrong the moment the room got louder, not because of the noise itself, but because of what it carried. Excitement, surprise, admiration. She stood near the edge of the room, hands loosely folded, watching as people began shifting toward the front, toward Marcus, toward something important. No one had told her what it was. That wasn't unusual. Evelyn had long accepted that not everything needed to be explained to her. But this time, it felt different. She took a small step forward, not to join, just to see, and then she saw it. The car, even from a distance, it was impossible to ignore. Polished, immaculate, loud in a way that demanded attention without making a sound. People gasped, laughed, pulled out their phones. Evelyn didn't react. She simply watched, because she was used to observing before understanding. Then she saw Sabrina, the way she stepped forward, the way her hands flew to her mouth. The way her entire face lit up. Unguarded, genuine. And then, the way she hugged Marcus, not cautiously, not formally, but freely. Evelyn's gaze lingered on that moment, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was expressive. And expression was something Evelyn had always kept contained. Marcus said something. Evelyn couldn't hear it, but she didn't need to. The meaning was already clear. The applause grew louder, and for a brief second, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar. Not jealousy, not anger, just displacement. Like she was standing in a moment that didn't belong to her. And maybe never had. She clapped, softly, because that was what you did. You acknowledged, you supported, you stayed composed, even when something inside you didn't quite align. Later, the crowd settled, the energy shifted, and Marcus approached her, calm, collected, the same way he always did. "There's something for you," he said. Evelyn looked at him. For a second, she wondered, not about the value, about the meaning. He handed her the small box, light, too light. She noticed that immediately, but she didn't react. Because reacting wasn't something she had been taught to do. She opened it. The piggy bank, simple, small, quiet. She stared at it for a moment, longer than necessary. And in that moment, something clicked. Not emotionally, logically, because Evelyn had always understood things best that way. The car wasn't just a gift. It was a message, public, clear, unmistakable. The piggy bank was also a message, just quieter. And somehow, that made it louder. She closed the box gently. "Thank you," she said. Marcus nodded, and just like that, the moment ended. At least, for him, but for Evelyn, it had just begun. She didn't leave immediately. She stayed, watched, observed, because that was what she did best. And what she saw wasn't just a celebration, it was a shift, in attention, in energy, in presence. Marcus moved differently around Sabrina. Sabrina responded differently to Marcus. Not hidden, not obvious enough to confront, but enough to feel, and Evelyn felt it, quietly, deeply, clearly. She stepped outside, not to escape, but to think. The air felt cooler, more honest. She walked slowly, no rush, no panic, because panic required uncertainty, and Evelyn was beginning to understand. She stopped near the car, not close enough to touch it, just enough to see it clearly, and she asked herself a question she had never asked before. What does this mean for me? Not for the marriage, not for Marcus, for her. And that question changed everything, because for the first time, she wasn't thinking about maintaining peace. She was thinking about truth. Behind her, the laughter continued. The celebration carried on, but Evelyn stood still, grounded, present, awake. She thought about all the years she had stayed quiet, all the moments she had chosen understanding over expression, all the times she had told herself, "It's fine." And now, standing here, she realized something simple. It had never been fine, it had just been silent. Footsteps approached. "Sabrina, beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. Evelyn nodded. "It is." A pause, not tense, not hostile, just aware. "You must be surprised," Sabrina added. Evelyn looked at her. "I am." And that was enough, because both of them understood, more than either of them said. Sabrina gave a small nod, then stepped away, leaving Evelyn alone again. Evelyn exhaled slowly, and in that breath, something shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but permanently, because she finally saw it, not the affair, not the betrayal, but the truth underneath it. She had been present in a life where she was no longer prioritized, and she had allowed it, not because she was weak, but because she had been taught that silence was strength. But now, she understood something else. Silence can also be surrender, and Evelyn Carter was no longer willing to surrender. She turned, not toward the car, not toward the crowd, but toward the house, toward the life she had been living. And for the first time, she wasn't walking to maintain it. She was walking to understand it, and maybe to change it. If you've ever had a moment where everything suddenly made sense, tell me, did it break you, or did it finally wake you up? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because in the next chapter, Evelyn does something she has never done before. Evelyn didn't confront him that night, not because she was afraid, not because she didn't have questions, but because, for the first time in her life, she didn't want to speak from emotion. She wanted to speak from clarity. The house was quiet when they returned from the Easter event, the kind of quiet that used to feel normal. Now it felt intentional. Marcus loosened his tie as he walked in, placing his keys on the table the same way he always did. Routine, predictable, controlled. Evelyn followed a few steps behind, not rushing, not delaying, just present. She placed the piggy bank gently on the console table near the entrance, not hidden, not displayed, just there. Marcus noticed it, briefly, then looked away, because even he understood. That object meant something now. Neither of them spoke, not immediately. Marcus moved toward his study, Evelyn toward the living room. Separate directions, same house. That used to feel natural. Now, it felt like distance. Evelyn sat down slowly, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her posture calm, her expression unreadable, but her mind focused. She wasn't replaying the event anymore. She had already understood it. Now, she was deciding not what had happened, but what it meant, and, more importantly, what she would do about it. Upstairs, Marcus stood in front of the mirror again, adjusting nothing, fixing nothing, just standing. He could feel it. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Evelyn hadn't argued, hadn't cried, hadn't demanded anything. And somehow, that unsettled him more than anything else could have. Because silence, when it changes, becomes unpredictable. And Marcus Carter didn't like unpredictability. The next morning, everything looked the same. Breakfast was set, coffee prepared, the house in order. Evelyn moved through the kitchen with her usual calm precision. Marcus entered. "Morning," he said. She nodded. "Morning." No tension, no sharpness, just neutral. Marcus poured his coffee, sat down. For a moment, it almost felt like nothing had happened. Almost. Then, Evelyn spoke. "Are you free this evening?" Marcus looked up, slightly surprised. "I should be." "Why?" Evelyn met his gaze. "I'd like to talk." The words were simple, but they didn't feel routine. Marcus paused. "About what?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Us." Silence. Different this time. Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay." And, just like that, something was set in motion. All day. Marcus thought about it, not obsessively, but enough, because conversations like that didn't happen between them. They avoided them, replaced them, moved around them. But this time, Evelyn had asked, and she hadn't softened it. She hadn't said, "if you want." She hadn't said, "it's nothing serious." She had simply said, "I'd like to talk." And that felt different. That evening, they sat in the living room. No distractions, no phones, no television, just space. Marcus leaned back slightly. Evelyn sat across from him, not defensive, not closed, just ready. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Old habits. Then, Evelyn broke it. "Do you feel like we're still connected?" Marcus blinked slightly. The question wasn't what he expected. "What do you mean?" he asked. Evelyn held his gaze. "I mean, do you feel like we're actually present with each other? Or just existing in the same space?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "That's a broad question." Evelyn nodded. "It is." Silence. Marcus shifted slightly. "We've always been like this," he said. Calm. Steady. Evelyn didn't argue. "Yes," she said. "But calm and distant aren't the same thing." That landed. Marcus looked at her. Really looked this time. And for the first time, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Not emotion. Not anger. Clarity. And clarity is harder to dismiss than emotion. "I didn't think you had a problem with how things are," he said. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I didn't either." A pause. Until I realized, I stopped asking myself if I should. Marcus frowned slightly. "What changed?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't know, but because she was choosing honesty. Carefully. "Easter didn't create anything new," she said. "It just made something visible." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "What exactly are you saying?" Evelyn met his eyes. "I'm saying, I think we've been quiet for so long. We stopped noticing what's missing." Silence. But this time, it wasn't avoidance. It was processing. Marcus sat back. "And what do you think is missing?" Evelyn paused, then said, "Connection." The word settled between them. Simple, clear, unavoidable. Marcus didn't respond right away, because for the first time, this wasn't a conversation he could manage. It was one he had to feel, and that was unfamiliar territory. If you've ever reached a point where silence is no longer enough, ask yourself, do you keep avoiding the conversation, or finally have it? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because in the next part, Evelyn says what she has held back for years. Marcus didn't rush to answer. For once, he didn't try to control the direction of the conversation. He just sat there, looking at Evelyn, as if he were finally seeing something he had missed for years. "Connection," he repeated quietly. Evelyn nodded. "Yes." Another pause. But this one wasn't avoidance. It was weight. Marcus leaned forward, resting his hands together. What does that look like to you? He asked. It was a genuine question. Not defensive, not dismissive. And that alone was new. Evelyn noticed it, but she didn't let it distract her. Being present, she said. Not just physically. Emotionally, knowing what the other person feels, without having to guess all the time. Marcus exhaled slowly. I thought we were fine, he said. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. I know. And that was the truth. He hadn't ignored her. He hadn't mistreated her in obvious ways. He had simply misunderstood her. I thought giving you space was respect, Marcus added. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. It is, she said. But only when the other person actually wants space. That landed deeper than anything else she had said. Because Marcus had never asked, he had assumed, and assumptions had quietly shaped their entire marriage. I didn't know you needed more, he admitted. Evelyn nodded. I didn't either. That was the part that mattered most. She wasn't blaming him. She was including herself. And that made the truth harder to dismiss. Marcus looked down briefly. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel certain. I don't think I've ever been good at that kind of thing, he said. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, because she wasn't trying to correct him. She was trying to understand him too. I know, she said softly. And again. No accusation, just acknowledgement. Silence settled again, but this time, it wasn't empty, it was honest. Marcus leaned back slightly. So, what are you saying? He asked. That we're not working? Evelyn held his gaze. I'm saying, we haven't been paying attention. A pause. To each other, she added. Marcus nodded slowly. That made sense. More sense than he expected. And now? He asked. Evelyn hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because she was about to say something she had never said before. I don't want to keep living like this, she said. The words were calm, but firm, and final, in a way that didn't require volume. Marcus felt that, not as pressure, as reality. What does that mean? He asked quietly. Evelyn took a breath. It means I don't want to be in a relationship where I have to stay quiet to keep things stable. Silence, heavy, because that sentence rewrote everything he thought he understood. I never asked you to stay quiet, Marcus said. Evelyn nodded. I know. Another pause. But you benefited from it, she added. That hit differently, because it was true. Marcus didn't argue. For once, he didn't defend himself. He just sat with it. Evelyn leaned back slightly. I've spent years thinking that not asking for more made me strong, she said. But all it did was make it easy for less to be enough. Marcus swallowed slightly, because he recognized himself in that, not in the silence, but in the acceptance of it. I didn't realize, he said. Evelyn gave a small, almost sad smile. I know. And there it was again. Not anger, not blame, just truth. And truth is harder to ignore than conflict. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. So, where does that leave us? He asked. Evelyn looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she didn't soften the answer. It leaves us at a point where we either start being honest, she said, or we keep pretending this is enough. Marcus held her gaze, and for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, not fear, but discomfort, the kind that comes from realizing something important. Too late. Is there something you're not saying? Evelyn asked. The question was quiet, but direct. Marcus froze, just slightly, because now, the conversation had reached the edge of something real, something he hadn't planned to address, something he had avoided for weeks, months, and now, it was here, in the space between them, unspoken, waiting. Marcus looked at her, calm, steady, present, and for the first time, her silence wasn't protecting him. It was holding space for the truth, and that made it impossible to hide. He opened his mouth, then closed it, because honesty required something he wasn't used to giving. Not control, not explanation, just truth. And truth doesn't come with strategy. It comes with consequence. He stopped, because even now, he wasn't ready. Evelyn watched him, not impatient, not emotional, just aware, and that awareness said everything. She nodded once, not in agreement. In understanding. You don't have to say it tonight, she said. Marcus looked at her, surprised. But you will have to say it eventually. Silence, final, clear, because she already knew, not the details, but the truth. And sometimes, that's enough. Evelyn stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just calmly. I'm not asking for perfection, she said. I'm asking for honesty. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, because, for the first time, he didn't have control of the outcome, only the choice, and Evelyn had already made hers. She was no longer going to stay silent, just to keep something that wasn't whole. If you've ever reached a point where you had to choose between silence and truth, tell me, which one did you choose? And what did it cost you? Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, because in the next chapter, the consequences of truth begin to unfold. Marcus didn't sleep that night, not because Evelyn had raised her voice, not because she had threatened to leave, but because, for the first time, she had made something unavoidable: honesty. And Marcus had spent years building a life where honesty, at least the emotional kind, was optional. Now, it wasn't. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Evelyn was beside him, quiet, still, not distant, just not reaching. That was new. She wasn't pulling away dramatically. She wasn't demanding anything. She had simply stopped filling the space, and that space felt larger than anything he had experienced before. Morning came without resolution. Marcus got up early, earlier than usual. He dressed in silence, moved carefully, not wanting to wake her, or maybe not ready to face her. He paused at the door, looked back. Evelyn hadn't moved, still calm, still composed. But now, he understood something he hadn't before. Calm didn't mean content, and silence didn't mean everything was okay. At the office, everything felt the same. The meetings, the conversations, the expectations. But Marcus didn't. He sat at the head of the table, listening as one of his executives outlined a new expansion plan. Numbers, projections, timelines, the kind of clarity he was used to, but none of it held his attention. Because for the first time, there was something in his life he couldn't calculate. Something without structure, without strategy, without control. And it was waiting for him at home. "You good?" one of his partners asked quietly as the meeting wrapped up. Marcus nodded automatically. Yeah. But the answer didn't feel solid, because good had always meant functional. Now, that definition didn't hold. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat alone in his office. His phone buzzed. "Sabrina, haven't heard from you today." He stared at the message. For a moment, he didn't pick it up. Not out of discipline, out of hesitation. Because now, everything felt connected, not separate. And that made things harder. He typed, "Busy," then paused, deleted it, typed again. "I need some time." He stared at the words, then hit send. A few seconds passed. Then, time for what? Marcus exhaled slowly, because that question required an answer he wasn't ready to fully explain. He didn't reply. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he wasn't managing the situation. He was feeling it, and that was unfamiliar. Across town, Evelyn sat in a quiet cafe, the same one she had met Lila at, but this time, she was alone. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her. Her hands rested around it, not drinking, just holding. She wasn't thinking about confrontation anymore. That part had passed. Now, she was thinking about something else. Clarity, not about Marcus, about herself, because for years, she had defined her role in the relationship by what she didn't do, didn't argue, didn't demand, didn't disrupt. But now, she was asking a different question. What do I actually want? And that question was harder to answer than anything she had asked before. She closed her eyes briefly, took a slow breath, and for the first time, she didn't rush past the answer. She let it come, quietly, honestly. "I want to feel seen." The thought settled, not dramatic, but real. She opened her eyes, and something inside her felt steady, not resolved, but grounded, because clarity, even when incomplete, is stronger than confusion. Back at the office, Marcus picked up his phone again, scrolled, paused, then stood, grabbed his jacket, and left. He didn't go to another meeting, didn't go to Sabrina. He drove, not with a destination, just movement, because for the first time, stillness didn't feel like control. It felt like confrontation. Eventually, he stopped, parked, sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, and thought, not strategically, honestly, about Evelyn, about the conversation, about the silence that had changed, and about the truth he hadn't said, because deep down, he knew, not just what he had done, but what it meant. At home, Evelyn returned later that evening. The house was quiet. She walked in, set her bag down, and paused, not because she expected anything to be different, but because she felt different. And that changed how everything looked. Marcus came in shortly after. Their eyes met. No tension, no performance, just awareness. "Hey," he said. "Hi." she replied. A pause, not uncomfortable, just real. I've been thinking, Marcus said. Evelyn nodded slightly. Me too. Silence. But this time, it didn't hide anything. It held everything. If you've ever had a moment where you couldn't avoid the truth anymore, ask yourself, did you face it? Or did you keep running from it? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because in the next part, Marcus finally says what he's been avoiding, and everything changes. Marcus didn't ease into it. There wasn't a careful build-up, no strategic wording, no attempt to soften what he had to say. Because for once, he understood something clearly. The truth doesn't need to be managed. It just needs to be said. I've been seeing someone. The words landed quietly. No raised voice, no dramatic pause. Just there. Evelyn didn't react immediately. Not because she was shocked, but because she had already arrived at the truth. Before he spoke it, she nodded once. Slowly. I know, she said. Marcus blinked slightly. You do? Evelyn held his gaze. Not everything, she replied. But enough. Silence followed. Not heavy. Not explosive. Just honest. Marcus exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. How was it supposed to happen? The question wasn't sharp, but it cut deeper than anger ever could. Marcus didn't answer right away. Because there wasn't a version of this. That sounded reasonable out loud. I didn't plan it, he said finally. Evelyn nodded. I believe you. And she did, because this wasn't about intention. It was about choices. Repeated, quiet, unchallenged. For how long? She asked. Marcus hesitated. Months. Evelyn absorbed that, not visibly, but internally. Something settled, not breaking, just confirming. Why didn't you say anything? Marcus asked. Evelyn looked at him. Because you didn't. A pause. And I've spent years learning not to ask questions people aren't ready to answer. That landed, because it wasn't just about this moment. It was about everything that led to it. Marcus sat down slowly. I didn't think it meant anything, he said. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, because that sentence was more revealing than anything else he had said. You didn't think it meant anything, she repeated. Marcus nodded. It wasn't about replacing you, or leaving. It was just different. Evelyn let that sit, then said, that's the problem. Marcus looked up. You don't see meaning in things unless they disrupt your structure. Silence. Because that was true. Marcus had always measured importance by impact. If it didn't break something, it didn't matter. But now, something had broken, and he was only just realizing it. Evelyn leaned back slightly. I'm not angry, she said. Marcus frowned. You're not? She shook her head. No. Another pause. I'm clear. And that was heavier than anger. Because anger can pass. Clarity stays. Marcus swallowed slightly. What does that mean? He asked. Evelyn looked at him. It means I understand what this is now. A pause. And what it isn't. Marcus didn't speak, because he wasn't sure what she meant. Or maybe he was. I spent a long time thinking silence was keeping this relationship strong, Evelyn continued. But all it did was hide the truth. She glanced down briefly, then back at him. You didn't just find something different, she said. You found something that was missing. Marcus opened his mouth, then stopped, because denying that would be dishonest. And for the first time, he wasn't trying to be anything but honest. I didn't know how to fix that, he admitted. Evelyn nodded. I know. Again. No blame, just understanding. Silence settled again, but this time, it wasn't avoidance. It was conclusion. So, what happens now? Marcus asked quietly. Evelyn didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't know, but because she was choosing her words carefully. For herself, not for him. I'm not going to stay in something where I have to disappear to keep it working, she said. The sentence was calm, but absolute. Marcus felt it, not as rejection, as reality. I don't want to lose this, he said. Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time, there was something softer in her expression. Not weakness, just honesty. You already did, she said gently. Silence. Because that was the truth. Not dramatic, just real. Marcus leaned forward slightly. We can fix it, he said. We can figure this out. Evelyn didn't shake her head, didn't reject it immediately. But she didn't accept it either. Fixing something requires both people to see it the same way, she said. A pause, and I don't think we did. Marcus sat back. He understood something clearly. They hadn't been in the same relationship. They had been in two different versions of it. Quietly. For years, Evelyn stood, not abruptly, not emotionally, just steadily. I'm not leaving in anger, she said. I'm choosing clarity. Marcus didn't move, didn't stop her, because something told him. This wasn't a moment he could control. Evelyn walked past him, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving forward. And for the first time, she wasn't walking to maintain something. She was walking away from what no longer fit. Marcus remained where he was, still. Silence didn't feel like safety. It felt like consequence. If you've ever had to walk away, not out of anger, but out of clarity, tell me, was it the hardest decision, or the most necessary one? Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, because in the final chapter, we see what happens after the truth, and what real peace actually looks like. The house didn't feel different the next morning. That was what surprised Evelyn the most. Nothing had shattered, nothing had been overturned. No visible sign that something fundamental had ended. The curtains still let in the same soft light. The kitchen still held the quiet scent of coffee. The clock still ticked at the same steady pace. Everything looked intact, but she wasn't, not broken, just no longer the same. Evelyn stood in the bedroom, her suitcase open on the bed, not full, not empty, just in progress. She wasn't rushing. There was no urgency in her movements. She folded her clothes carefully, placing them inside one at a time. This wasn't escape. It was transition, a shift from something she had understood for years to something she was only beginning to understand now. Downstairs, Marcus stood in the kitchen. He hadn't slept much, not because he didn't have time, but because his mind hadn't settled. The silence in the house felt different now, not shared, separated. He poured himself coffee, forgot to drink it, just stood there, because for the first time, he didn't know what to do next. There was no strategy for this, no structure, no control, just consequence. He heard movement upstairs, paused, considered going up, then didn't, because he didn't know what he would say. And for the first time, words mattered. Evelyn closed the suitcase halfway, not finished, just pausing. She looked around the room. The space she had lived in, moved through, adjusted within. Everything still reflected the life she had built. But now, she saw it differently. Not as something she belonged to, but something she had adapted to, and there's a difference. She walked over to the nightstand. The piggy bank was still there, unmoved. She picked it up, held it for a moment. It felt the same, light, simple, but now, it meant something else. Not smallness, clarity, a moment she could never unsee. Evelyn set it back down, not taking it with her, because she didn't need to carry that reminder anymore. She had already learned from it. Downstairs, Marcus finally moved. He walked toward the staircase, slowly, not with certainty, but with intention. Evelyn heard him before she saw him. She turned slightly as he stepped into the doorway. They looked at each other, no tension, no performance, just honesty. "You're leaving," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn nodded. Yes. A pause, not uncomfortable, just real. "For how long?" he asked. Evelyn thought about that, then answered honestly, "I don't know." Marcus nodded slowly, because for the first time, that answer made sense. Not everything needed to be defined immediately. "I meant what I said," he added. Evelyn held his gaze. "I know." Another pause. "I just need space to understand what I want now," she said. Marcus didn't argue, didn't try to convince her to stay, because for the first time, he understood something clearly. This wasn't about stopping her. It was about what she had already realized. "I should have said something sooner," he said quietly. Evelyn shook her head gently. "We both should have." And again, no blame, just truth. Marcus looked around the room briefly, as if seeing it differently now too. "I didn't think silence could do this," he admitted. Evelyn gave a small, almost knowing smile. "It doesn't feel like much while it's happening," she said. "But it builds." Marcus nodded, because now, he could see it. Every moment they didn't speak, every feeling they didn't express, every question they didn't ask, it had all led here. Quietly, Evelyn picked up her suitcase. Not heavy, but meaningful. She walked toward the door. Marcus stepped aside, not because he had to, because he understood. She paused beside him, not to stay, just to acknowledge. "I don't regret us," she said. Marcus looked at her. "Neither do I." And that was true, because what they had was real. It just hadn't been complete. Evelyn nodded once, then walked past him, down the stairs, through the house, and out the door. Marcus didn't follow. He stood there, listening to the quiet. But now, it didn't feel empty. It felt honest. Outside, Evelyn stepped into the morning light. The air felt different. Not lighter, just clearer. She didn't rush, didn't look back. Not because she was closing a door completely, but because she wasn't defined by it anymore. For the first time, she wasn't moving in silence to keep something, she was moving forward, to understand herself. And that was where everything truly began. If you've ever walked away to find clarity instead of conflict, ask yourself, did you lose something? Or did you finally find yourself? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because, in the final part, we see what peace really looks like after everything settles. The silence didn't follow Evelyn. That was the first thing she noticed. When she stepped into the small apartment 2 days later, it wasn't filled with echoes or emptiness. It was just quiet. A different kind of quiet. Not the kind that asked her to shrink. Not the kind that expected her to hold things in place. Just space. She set her suitcase down near the door and stood there for a moment, taking it in. The room wasn't large. The furniture was simple. Nothing about it was impressive. But it felt honest. Evelyn walked to the window and pulled the curtains slightly aside. The street below was calm. People moving. Life continuing. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was watching life from the outside. She felt present in it. The first few days weren't dramatic. There were no breakdowns, no emotional spirals. Just adjustment. She woke up without routine dictating her pace, made coffee when she wanted, sat in silence when she chose to, not because she had to, and something subtle began to shift. She started noticing herself, not in a critical way, in an aware way, what she liked, what she didn't, what she had ignored for years, and slowly, her silence changed. It was no longer avoidance. It became reflection. Across town, Marcus remained in the house. Everything was still where it had been. Nothing missing, nothing broken, but something was undeniably gone. Presence. Not Evelyn's physical presence, but the quiet consistency that had once filled the space without him noticing. Now, he noticed everything. The stillness, the absence of small routines, the lack of balance. He sat at the dining table one evening, 2 plates set out of habit, then paused, removed one, and in that small action, something settled. Not regret. Understanding. He picked up his phone, scrolled, paused at Sabrina's name. He didn't open the conversation, not because he was avoiding it, because, for the first time, he was thinking about what it meant, not what it felt like. What it meant, and meaning, had changed. Weeks passed, not dramatically. Quietly, Evelyn built a rhythm. Marcus sat with reflection. Neither rushed into decisions, neither forced resolution, because for once, they weren't trying to control the outcome. They were understanding it. One afternoon, Evelyn stood in a bookstore, running her fingers lightly along the spines of books she hadn't made time for in years. She picked one up, opened it, and smiled faintly. Not because of the story, because of the moment. Simple, unforced, hers. That same day, Marcus sat in his office, staring at a contract he would have signed without hesitation months ago. Now, he read it more slowly, not because it was complicated, because he had learned something. Rushing clarity leads to mistakes, and for the first time, he wasn't rushing. Later that evening, their paths crossed again, not by design, just timing. A quiet restaurant, a familiar space. Evelyn saw him first, paused, not startled, not uncomfortable, just aware. Marcus looked up, saw her, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, he stood, not out of obligation, out of respect. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she replied. They stood there, not as husband and wife, not as strangers, just 2 people who understood something they hadn't before. "Can I sit?" he asked. Evelyn considered it, then nodded. Yes. They sat across from each other, the same position, but a different space. "You look different," Marcus said. Evelyn gave a small smile. "I feel different." A pause. "Better?" he asked. Evelyn thought about it, then said, "Clearer." Marcus nodded. "That makes sense." Silence settled between them, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't hiding anything. It was just there, neutral. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus admitted. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Which part?" "All of it." A faint smile touched her lips. "That's a lot." He nodded. "It is." Another pause. "I didn't understand how much silence was costing us," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "I didn't either." And that was the truth. Marcus leaned back slightly. "I've been trying to be more aware," he added. Evelyn nodded. "That's a good place to start. No pressure, no expectation, just acknowledgement." They didn't talk about getting back together. They didn't talk about the future in big terms, because for the first time, they understood something important. Clarity doesn't need to rush into decisions. It just needs to exist. After a while, Evelyn stood. "I should go," Marcus nodded. Yeah. A pause. Then, Evelyn. She looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. Simple, unpracticed, real. Evelyn held his gaze, then nodded. I know. And she did, because for the first time, he wasn't saying it to fix something. He was saying it because he understood. She gave a small, gentle smile, then turned and walked away. Marcus watched her go, not with regret, not with urgency, just acceptance. Because sometimes, the most honest ending isn't about getting everything back. It's about finally understanding what was lost. Outside, Evelyn stepped into the evening air. The city moved around her, alive, and for the first time, she wasn't carrying silence as a shield. She was carrying clarity as strength. And that made all the difference. Because, in the end, love doesn't fail because people stop caring. It fails when people stop communicating. And it heals when they finally do, even if it's too late to stay. It's never too late to understand. If this story stayed with you, take a moment and ask yourself, what have you left unsaid? That might be costing you more than you realize. If this story touched you, then you already understand. Sometimes love doesn't end with shouting. It ends with silence that lasted too long. If you've ever held something in, if you've ever loved quietly and lost slowly, take a moment right now. Like this video so more people can hear this message. Subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for stories that don't just entertain, but teach, heal, and open your eyes. And in the comments, tell me honestly, what's something you wish you had said before it was too late? Because the truth is, the right words, spoken at the right time, can save what silence slowly destroys. And sometimes, understanding comes after the ending.